Alrighty, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to The Offseason is Hard. Shouldn't you be too? Roll the intro.
It's like a great, fun time. I actually kind of want to start more with the most recent
Something you've already blown up your entire roster once.
Houston just made such a big announcement.
Disappointing. Cannot be more disappointing than the Toronto Defiance.
All of a sudden, when you say that, and you're like, oh yeah, Dallas is probably third place. Where do you put Houston? All our talks about what the incline's going to be like, and they said, fuck it, nothing's going to stay.
Okay, so today we're talking about the Boston Uprising, and well, let's just go over their roster. So for tanks, they have Marvel and Punk, which is a change from last year, given that last year they had Stand 1 instead of Marvel. They dropped Gibolsi in the offseason. Not that Gibolsi had a bad year, but Punk showed himself to be better, and they decided to bring in Marvel. Anyway, next on DPS, they still have Valentine. They've brought Victoria up from Uprising Academy, and Boston Uprising fans, you have the return of Striker. Needless to say, that seems to be a pretty major pickup. One of the best DPS in Overwatch League history. I'm pretty sure he made Plat Chat's top 10. That's massive. And then finally, for their backline, for their supports, you saw the departure of Myunbong, who... Where did Myunbong go? I believe he went to Nixel. And then you saw them keep Faith, and then they brought in KRIMZO and MCD. KRIMZO previously playing for the Houston Outlaws, and MCD, who previously played for the Hangzhou Spark. Now, let's start from the top down, starting with tanks and what we think. Punk, I think, is technically the better player out of him and Marvel, with the higher peaks on characters like D.Va, Sigma as well. We've seen him play some Hog in the past. And he should be pretty good at the Zarya too, if I'm not mistaken. I've got loads of faith in Punk. We do tend to see off tanks that can pick up the ball as well, so there is that. That being said, Marvel is the only... not the only tank player. Marvel is a player who we've seen play almost all of the tanks. His Sigma rivals that and is possibly better than that of Punk's, because let's not forget that Marvel was the one who basically spearheaded Sigma play when the character first released. Despite it being an off tank, we've also seen Marvel play D.Va, although it hasn't been that good. His D.Va was not good, because D.Va is such an important role, that having someone like basically all off tank specialize in it. So when Seoul 2 seasons ago decided to go, hey, we're gonna run Marvel and Gesture together as a tank duo, because Marvel's a 6 Sigma, and he can pick up D.Va fine, which it really wasn't the same as having someone like a dedicated off-tank player, because off-tank players have pretty much only ever played D.Va, because D.Va is just that strong of a character. There's a big difference there. But we have seen him play it, albeit not to the greatest ability. But Marvel's probably the most flexible main tank player coming out of Overwatch 1 and going into Overwatch 2. And so for that reason, I think he is actually a very underrated pickup for this team, and would have been a very underrated pickup for any team over this past offseason. We know he can play the Rhine really well. His Winston is decent. I would say it's about league average. And, Orissa's Orissa. And we've seen him play the ball. His ball's been pretty good. Which one of the two would I expect to see get more play time? from what we've heard, off-tank players have been performing the best in scrims. Again, that being said, if I were the coach of the Boston Uprising, and keep in mind I know basically nothing, I would start with Marvel. I would start looking at Marvel first because he is the most flexible, and that's something that I prefer when looking at something that you only have one person to fill that role for. You only have one tank slot. Do you want someone who can learn and play all the characters, or do you want someone who's going to have those high peaks? And each team is going to make a different decision. But I do think Boston has their bases covered here. However, I would start Marvel and go from there. Next, going on to the DPS lineup, Valentine played last year. He was a little underwhelming from what we had heard about him in the previous offseason. I think Boston would have benefited last year from playing what they're good at and maybe not necessarily the meta, because when we did see Valentine play things like the Genji, he was pretty damn good. Moving on to Striker, we know what Striker brings. Phenomenal tracer, can play the Cassidy, can play really anything. He can play any of the hit scans, he can play the Widow, he can play the Ashe. He did get subbed out for Ons because Ons, when they were both on the San Francisco Shock, was the better long-range hit scan. However, Striker should not be underrated. He is a 2-time Grand Finals champion. He's got some leadership capabilities. He's just a phenomenal player in general. Ow, I hit myself. Now, next we have Victoria. Victoria's getting called up from Uprising Academy. Now, Victoria, he didn't see a whole lot of playtime from what I saw, but bear in mind, I watched maybe like 3 games of Uprising Academy because I was really interested to see Finale, and in some cases they subbed out Finale and put in Victoria, but I think it was just for the sake of getting him playtime because he really didn't play anything too different from Finale. We saw him on the Echo, we saw him on the Hanzo, and those were the 2 main things. I am not expecting to see Victoria get playtime. Now, next, moving on to the supports. Faith, he was a steady main tank. He was a steady main support. Played the Lucio, played the Brig, played the Mercy. Didn't really have too many pop-off moments. Next, we've got KRIMZO and MCD. MCD got some playtime. I'm pretty sure he got quite a bit of playtime on Hangzhou Spark. But I'm most interested in KRIMZO, the Canadian boy, playing in Boston. He played on Houston last year. I thought he was pretty solid. I think Houston had issues last year related more to player flexibility, as they had to sub Juby out for Jake to play the Brig. But KRIMZO has always, in my eyes, been an upper class flex support. I'm not putting him up there with Violet, but I am putting him in maybe... if we're going in tiers, I think KRIMZO is an A tier support. We've seen him pop off in things like the World Cup. We've seen him pop off in matches. He's a damn good flex support. I would like to see him get playtime over MCD. Not that MCD is bad. But also keep in mind, Boston Uprising here is the first team, not the first team that I'm going through on this list that has 2 flex supports, because we are expecting to see double flex support ran next year in Overwatch 2. But, and I believe they said this on Plat Chat the other week, if we're seeing supports get blown up because there's one less tank, main support is actually probably going to be pretty important this off-season, or this coming season, because you can have characters like Brig, like Lucio, who can knock back and transport your flex support away so they can stay alive. Main supports do have the potential to be fill a pretty important role in this coming season. But again, the expectation is that we're going to see double flex support, so Boston Uprising seems to have all their bases covered. Now, that being said, where do I rate them? They are not better than the Atlanta Reign, I don't think. I think Atlanta Reign still have the better tanks. I think they have the better DPS. And you might be wondering, okay, how can you say that? Boston has goddamn Striker. If we're actually looking at the DPS lineups of these two teams, sure, Striker is probably slightly better than Kai, and slightly more flexible given that he can play the Tracer as well. But are you really taking Victoria and Valentine over Nero and Venom? I'm not. I'm really not. And so, for that reason, I think the Reign are going to be better. Same thing with their... well, maybe not with their flex supports. I think OG is probably going to be better than Faith. But until I see Ultraviolet play, because I'll be honest, I have not seen Ultraviolet play. I just know based off the reputation of Redbird Esports and American Tornadoes that he's cracked. But until then, KRIMZO gets the benefit of the doubt, having actually played in Overwatch League before, having played in important matches and done well and popped off. I think KRIMZO is probably the better flex support, but we have yet to see. But Atlanta Reign overall, I think, has a better team, and so for that reason, or has a better team, has individually better players than Boston Uprising. So for that reason, I rate them below the Atlanta Reign. That being said, the Excitometer for Boston Uprising, I'm giving a 7 out of 10. The reason I'm so excited about them is because I believe in Marvel, and I believe in KRIMZO, and they have goddamn Striker. Okay, that's exciting. Those three players are the ones that excite me the most about this roster. Thank you guys for tuning in. Next, we will be going over the Florida Mayhem with Chadmate, the Giga Chad Reinhardt. So, I'll catch you guys in that episode. Stay tuned.